Usually how it's posited is, big bad banks, bad hedge funds, bad derivatives, bad credit default swaps, good real economy. We need industrial strategy, which is something that I've actually been fighting for a long time, innovation policy, but this myth that somehow the real economy is good, these industries are good, we have to think of how to revitalize them, is really problematic. Because if you look at how the real economy is operating, it's just as bad as the banks. The particular sectors I've been looking at, so computers, pharmaceuticals, biotech, and the emerging clean tech sector, one of the beautiful phrases that Andy Haldane has used to describe what's wrong with banking is just as wrong in those sectors. And what he's talked about is the socialization of risk, privatization of rewards. And that's what we have to rebalance in both the financial sector as well as the real economy. That's my first point, just one piece of evidence there, because that's what I'd like to do, give you a little bit of a flavor for each of these points. Evidence there, if you look at, say, the life science sector, which is currently top of the list of the key sectors that Vince Cable, as well as Chukwamuna, say we have to really target again in order to revitalize the UK, both Pfizer and Amgen spend more money on just buying back their own stock, their shares, than on R&D, okay? Amgen spent 115% in 2011 of what it spent on R&D just on buying back their stock. Why do they do that? It obviously boosts stock options. Stock options are linked to executive pay. So the whole 1%, 99% thing, which everyone talks about, really has to be thinking very crucially about these particular problems. And you ask these companies, why are you doing that? Why aren't you reinvesting your profits, which are big, right? Both pharmaceuticals and oil, which are the two biggest share buybackers, are also have the highest profits in the Fortune 500 in terms of sectors. They say, oh, well, there's no opportunities. That's the right thing to do. Who's actually funding the opportunities in life sciences? Who's funding the opportunities today in clean technology? I'm going to come back to that on my fourth point. Surprise, surprise, the public sector. Just as an example, in the United States, the National Public Institutes of Health spend, let me see, last year in 2012, don't ask me why I know these numbers, $30.9 billion on the pharmaceutical and biotechnology base. Okay, there's plenty of opportunities out there. In fact, 75% of new molecular entities with priority rating are coming out of those labs, with private pharma focusing more on the easier stuff, the Me Too drugs, so Viagra, different color, different dosage. That's the first point. So be aware, we need to rebalance. Rebalancing means definancializing how the real economy works. I'll come to the IT sector in a minute. Second point, and I just said it upstairs in a little video they were doing, and I could tell they were like, I don't know if we're going to put this on camera, on the video. They said, how can we reinvigorate SMEs? I'm like, why would you want to do that? No. SMEs are not as important as you're told. Very few are, something like 5 to 6% of SMEs are. In other words, they create net employment, so actually creating more jobs than they destroy, because most SMEs go bust after 2 to 3 years. So it depends whose research you're looking at, and if anyone's interested, I can give you some references, but something like 4 to 6% of SMEs actually create net employment, and even more important, are actually even interested in growing and innovating. Okay, so this myth about sort of the entrepreneurial SME, 4 to 6%. So the real ambition or challenge for government should be to really be targeting these companies. But another way to say it, as would be relevant for this particular conference, which is interested in transforming finance, is the problem is not supply of finance, is the demand for finance. There are not enough companies, especially in countries like the UK, but would add there most of the periphery of Europe, so the pigs, of which I think the UK would have been one of them if it didn't have the Bank of England. There's a real demand for finance problem. There's not enough companies that actually even really want to raise their stakes and to be doing the hard stuff. And just always talking about the credit crunch and supply finance is ignoring that problem. By the way, they're not the only ones who are mythologized. Venture capital, which somehow everyone wants to be copying if you look at the European Commission documents on how to reinvigorate Europe, it's all about getting VC funding. VC, they come in 15 years after the state has done the really hard stuff. If you look at biotech, internet, nanotech, clean technology today, in biotechnology, the venture capitalists came more or less 12 to 16 years after the state actually invested, as I said before, through agencies like the NIH, or in this country through the MRC, which were the Medical Research Council, which was very important. I have 5 more minutes? That's amazing. Oh, I can slow down. Okay. Right, so be aware of all these. No, she said 5. Okay, yeah. Anyway, I don't need 5. The other thing is, just coming back to this point that I'm saying is be aware of these myths, is why is it important that Apple be paying its tax or that Google be paying its tax? I don't think that we've really gone to sort of the crunch of it. And that's because, again, if you think about it, why companies should pay tax depends on what you think the state is even doing, right? Because that's sort of the bill that comes back to the state. If the state is simply just fixing market failures here and there or creating the conditions for innovation through these different sort of horizontal things like these catapult centers, then you can sort of get away with not necessarily demanding from the corporate sector that they be paying a much bigger bill, right? Because there's this whole movement now to get the corporate tax rate to be sort of a flat tax, quite low. It's extremely low. And by the way, who actually lobbied for it to be so low? It wasn't the oil tycoons. It was, in fact, the venture capitalists in the early 1990s in both the US and the UK that said, if you want innovators like us, you have to reduce our capital gains tax. We're going to invest more. And there's no evidence at all that tax has any effect on innovation. But that's a side point. But the point is, take the iPhone, so Apple. The iPhone, every single technology on your iPhone, and I'm sure many people here have an iPhone, the internet, GPS, touchscreen display, even this new thing which I always press by accident, that Siri voice-activated thing, it's all state-funded, yeah? And Apple pays hardly any tax. And it has been able to really dodge it completely, even in the US, where they moved one of their subsidiaries to Reno, Nevada, from Cupertino, California, which is where all the research was funded, and managed to not pay something like $2.6 billion to the state of California, which currently has a $6 billion deficit. The tax gap in this country, the tax gap, which includes tax avoidance, tax evasion, and late payments, which often don't even get paid, is close to our deficit, right? It's 120 billion. The deficit of this country is 126 billion. But the big question is, how many people know that the state funded almost everything that makes the iPhone smart and not stupid? Hardly anyone. And we really have to be, telling that finance story, because that's about finance. Lastly, innovation, which is my specialty. That's probably why I keep giving this slant to these 4 points. It's very cumulative, right? It is not a Gaussian process. It is not a white noise event where you just get these shock innovations. It's very cumulative. Innovation today builds on innovation yesterday. So think of it as a distribution curve. The fact that it is cumulative is actually what is allowing large shareholders, coming back to my first point at the beginning with the stock buybacks, as well as the venture capitalists, to come in sort of late, but capture the entire integral under that curve. Okay, and what we need to be doing in terms of rebalancing is preventing that from happening. But the only way to do that is to tell stories, the real story about innovation, the innovation economy. And you can buy my book that's coming out June 1st on the entrepreneurial state with Anthem Press, where I really tell the Apple story slowly, because it has to be told slowly. The new molecular entity story has to be told slowly, and the real bad news is green technology. I have 2 big chapters there, and who's actually spending on green? Well, guess what? It's the Brazilian Development Bank, it's the Chinese Development Bank, it's ARPA-E in the US, which was founded as an agency modeled along the DARPA lines. And we really need to be telling that story in order to make sure that the returns this time, unlike in the internet, actually get just as socialized as the risks.